Hello there, everybody. Hallo zusammen, and welcome to this German GCSE and iGCSE video tutorial. This particular tutorial looks at another tricky part of German grammar, very tricky for, potentially for quite a few students, which is adjective endings. Regardless of your exam board, regardless of what grade you're aiming for, you will need to know at least some of this on material on adjective endings for German GCSE or iGCSE. This should be very helpful. I attempt to go through all of it here. Firstly, to introduce myself, I'm Dhananjay Talwar. I studied French and Italian for my MA degree at the University of Cambridge. After graduating in 2015, I started out with tutoring, and I've been in the field of education ever since that time, really. And I've been a full-time tutor for a good 6 years now. I'm really passionate about languages, both learning them and teaching them. In fact, I've learned more than 20 languages myself to different levels, at least 9 of those to fluency. German is, of course, one of them, which I did at school for GCSE before improving elsewhere with friends. It's something I love to do, learning languages. And I equally love motivating students and helping them to reach their language learning goals and giving them the tools to allow them to get to target grades in exams like GCSEs while having a lot of fun learning the languages on the way. Up till now, I've managed to help more than 500 students achieve or even surpass their target grade in language GCSE or iGCSE exams. As a full-time tutor, I've taught 8 languages to GCSE level so far, and some at high levels as well. And it's very much been a great experience. So these here are the German GCSE and iGCSE exam boards. Very useful to be aware of differences from one exam board to the other. These do change over time, so you do need to be aware of what the format and syllabus will be for your particular exam or set of exams. And the website for your exam board is normally one of the best places to consult for more information on that. But I would keep track of that website, the information there, and try and tailor your preparation towards your exam board too, instead of making it too general. This video, though, this particular tutorial is quite general in nature. We are looking here at a part of German GCSE and iGCSE grammar, or German grammar, which is adjective endings. And so this is going to be useful for all German GCSE and iGCSE students. Doesn't matter what exam board you're doing, and also shouldn't really matter what level you're doing, whether it's foundation tier or higher tier. There will be definite value in this tutorial for you. So let's move on to that value then and look at adjective endings. So just to define what adjectives are, firstly, by definition, adjectives are, of course, words that describe nouns. That's the first definition to be aware of. In German, adjectives change their endings depending on 3 things. So depending on the number, which is whether it's singular or plural, the gender, meaning masculine, feminine, or neuter, and the case, meaning nominative, accusative, genitive, or dative of the noun that they agree with. So an adjective, by definition, will always describe a noun or nouns. And in German, the adjectives normally have to change their endings depending on the number, gender, and case of the noun they agree with to show complete agreement with that noun. Although, as you'll see, this does depend also on what comes in front of the adjective, potentially. And there is a crucial exception, which it's very important to remember. This is something that's often forgotten, actually, in German. And that is that adjectives only have to agree with the noun that they describe in German when they are next to them. In other words, if they're separated by a verb, then the adjective just remains in its masculine singular nominative form. Its most neutral or most common form, which is the form that you'd find when you're generally learning that adjective, and in the dictionary, for example, too. So if there's a verb in there separating the noun from the adjective describing it, then there's no agreement whatsoever. The adjective itself will just remain in its masculine singular nominative form. So that removes quite a few headaches, potentially. You don't have to think about agreements when the adjective doesn't come right next to, next to the noun that it describes. If the adjective is next to or somewhat next to the noun it describes, but separated by words in between, say other adjectives, for example, that's still possible. And in that case, there would still need to be agreement between the adjective and the noun that it's describing in terms of number, gender, and case. But if there's a verb in between, then there is no agreement. Then the adjective stays in masculine singular nominative form, which is a lot easier. You don't have to think about what the correct form of the adjective is there. Here are some examples. So, das rote Haus would be the red house. You can see that the word for red, the dictionary form of the adjective red in German would be rot, R-O-T. But here it changes to rote because the adjective comes right next to the noun it's describing, the house. And it's even accompanied by the definite article, the word for the, in front of it, which means that the adjective red must be in the form rote, not just rot. So there is some agreement. And the adjective ending changes to reflect the noun it's describing. On the other hand, when there's a verb in between, like in this example, das Haus ist rot, meaning the house is red, you can see that rot just remains in its standard masculine singular nominative form, or its dictionary form. It doesn't change. There's no e at the end because it doesn't actually have to directly agree with house because of that verb in between, ist, meaning is. That conjugated verb separating the noun and the verb means, the noun and the adjective means that the adjective doesn't actually have to agree with the noun it's describing. So make sure to remember that rule as much as you can. In terms of adjective endings, this definitely tends to be one of the trickiest parts of German grammar because there's different patterns. In fact, 3 slightly different patterns of adjective endings. Those adjective endings change depending on what comes in front of the adjective. So if there is a definite article, the word for the, in front of the adjective, then there's one pattern. If there's an indefinite article, the word for or an, in front of the adjective, then there's a slightly different pattern. And if there's just adjective followed by noun without the or an in front, then again, it's a slightly different pattern again. So remembering all of these, and I'll show you the tables, which most people will go through and will see in school as well. Remembering those tables can take quite a bit of effort. I will try and show you shortcuts and patterns that will make it easier to remember that rather than just rote learning everything, because that really is the key. Rote learning large pieces of information, lots and lots of information, is generally not the most efficient and not the most interesting way to learn anyways either. It can generally be more fun to actually use and interact with the language. The important thing, this is the way that I would still think about it, is that the words in front of the noun have to indicate in some way the gender, number, and case of the noun. Gender, again, being whether it's masculine, feminine, or neuter. Number, singular or plural, and case meaning nominative, accusative, genitive, or dative. The words in front of the noun have to reveal or give information about its gender, the gender, number, and case of the noun in some way. If there's a definite article there, then usually the definite article, the word for the, will do that. And therefore the adjective no longer has to. But if there isn't a definite article in front of the adjective, then it's down to the adjective normally to show the gender, number, and case of the noun through the adjective's own ending. As we'll see. So the adjective endings do depend on these 3 elements: the gender of the noun it describes, whether it's masculine, feminine, or neuter; the number of the noun, whether it's singular, plural; the case of the noun it's describing, nominative, accusative, genitive, or dative. But as mentioned, you don't have to think about any of this when there's a verb separating the noun from the adjective it's describing. Because when there's a verb form in between, you simply use the masculine singular nominative form of the adjective, the most common form of that adjective. Okay, these definitely do normally take repetition. Yeah, people are very unlikely to be able to learn these kinds of tables just by heart, just by looking at them a few times. You will have to repeat them, get used to them, yeah, and understand how they work a little bit. These are some of the hardest parts or the hardest intricacies of German grammar that people often have trouble memorizing. If you can understand the concepts, though, and the reasoning behind it, yeah, that makes a big difference. And then it's just a case of trying to remember the patterns as much as you can. But I will try and break that down as simply as possible. So the first pattern that we're going to look at is when there is just an adjective followed by a noun. So there's no word for the or an or anything in front of the adjective. It's simply an adjective, then a noun. And in that case, it's down to the adjective to show the gender, number, and case of the noun, or to reflect the gender, number, and case of the noun through the adjective's own ending. For example, yeah, the adjective's ending should give some information about the gender, number, or case of the noun. For example, if somebody says großer Mann, we know that it is in the masculine nominative singular. Yeah, most likely through the adjective ending. If somebody was to say großes, as in großes Auto, where we'd almost automatically know it's probably in the nominative neuter singular, or potentially accusative neuter singular. But that es ending does give us a little bit of information about the number, gender, or case, at least, of the noun. So when it's just an adjective followed by a noun, the way I would think of it is the adjective takes these strong endings. And the endings are the last two letters of each of the adjective forms here. So for große, as in großer Mann, it would be the er at the end, which is the nominative masculine singular ending. And remember, this is just when there's an adjective only and then a noun directly after that. Yeah, for große Frau, for instance, the ending would just be the final E of große, and so on. There are quite a few patterns. So if you look at this table, many students are presented with these kinds of tables at school. Yeah, and it can be very overwhelming because there's so many forms to remember. And if you're not used to looking at these kinds of tables, you've never seen this kind of language before, that can definitely be intimidating. There are definite patterns, though, to help you remember this. Yeah, for example, for the feminine and neuter genders, the nominative singular and the accusative singular pattern is exactly the same. The only difference between nominative and accusative is in the masculine singular, where it goes from großer Mann ending er to großen Mann ending in en. So these patterns can help you to memorize them, these kinds of tables and patterns more efficiently. In the dative singular, for example, the masculine singular form of the adjective would end in em, and likewise the neuter singular form of the adjective is exactly the same, ending in em. So in the dative and genitive singular, the masculine and neuter nouns have exactly the same patterns as each other, actually. And for feminine nouns, the dative singular and genitive singular also are the same. They both end in er. So that can definitely help. Yeah, condense all of this information and make it easier to remember and retain. In the plural, of course, in German, there's never any gender. Gender is not important or relevant in the plurals in German, and that does make it quite a bit easier because there's less forms, there's less to remember. In the plurals, the nominative and accusatives are the same for adjectives. They will both end in e only. They would add an e to the end of the standard neutral adjective form. And in the dative and genitive plural, the dative plural would add en, the genitive plural would add er. Remember, this is the pattern for an adjective followed by a noun. The pattern will change a little bit, as we'll see. when the word for the comes in front of the adjective, and when the word for or an comes in front of the adjective, or similar words, it has a slightly different pattern again. But there are considerable similarities between all of them, which tie them together, link them, and make them easier to remember. So look out for those similarities as much as you can, rather than trying to learn them one by one, which can be less efficient, more time consuming. And yeah, remember that once you know one of these tables as well, if you feel like you know what the whole table by heart, that really helps with memorizing the rest of the tables too. So it's not that you're starting completely from scratch and you have to memorize each table completely separately. There's a lot of overlap among them, and try and use that overlap to make it less overwhelming as well. A few more important patterns to point out here. As indicated by these stars here, in the genitive singular for masculine nouns and neuter nouns, the noun itself actually has to change. So if it ends in a vowel, then the noun itself would simply add an S, like autor. Autor ends in the vowel O, of course, so you must add an S only. But if it ends in a consonant, then you add es, the letters es. And these are changes made to the noun itself. You add s or es, those letters, on the end of the noun itself, which is quite strange. All of the rest of the changes only regard the adjective. The noun itself otherwise remains the same, apart from the genitive singular for masculine and neuter nouns and the dative plural. In the vast majority of the cases, the noun is not going to change at all. Occasionally, there's a few specific instances where you must change the noun ending to. Genitive singular for masculine and neuter nouns is one of those. The other one is dative plural. So for dative plural, for all genders, of course, the noun must end in N or EN. So you're going to have to add an N to the end of the noun, or en if n doesn't work. So you must remember that to change the noun for genitive singular masculine neuter nouns, and for the dative plural for all nouns as well. Okay, this is where things perhaps might seem to get a bit more complicated, but again, I will try and simplify it as much as possible again. So the first table that we looked at here is when there is just an adjective followed by a noun. So no third word in the beginning. Now we're looking at a slightly different table, which is when the word for the comes first, then an adjective, and then a noun. So that has a slightly different pattern. Whereas in this first table, the adjectives had what I would call strong endings. The strong endings usually reveal something of the number, gender, and case of the noun that follows. In this second table, the adjectives are all in what I would call weak endings. The weak endings for German adjectives are simply either the ending e, either the letter e, or the letters en. As you can see here, the adjective in all of these forms, all of the adjectives in bold here, they all end in either the letter e or the letters en. So those are the weak endings for the adjectives. The reason why is because there is the word for the coming in front of the adjective. And it's the word for the that usually reveals through its own form or its own ending. That's the one that gives an idea of the number, gender, and case of the noun. So if the word for the is already in the strong form, it already tells us something about the number, gender, and case of the noun. Therefore, it's no longer up to the adjective to reveal this information or to convey this information at all. So the adjective would simply take a more neutral, weak form instead, which is going to either be an ending in e or an en. So all you've got to do really in this case is, apart from knowing the different forms of the word the in German, which are important, you need to know the weak endings for the adjectives, when it ends in e and when it takes an en in its weak form, which is actually quite a bit simpler than the first table that we looked at. There are far fewer endings to think of here. Because the endings that you've got to choose between are simply e or en. yeah, the ending E is there in all of the nominative singular forms for masculine, feminine, and neuter, and in the accusative singular forms for feminine and neuter nouns too. For everything else, absolutely everything else, you'd use en. That's probably the easiest way to remember it, and that's the way I would still think of it now. With practice, of course, this does get far easier. And you must bear in mind that these are arguably the hardest parts of German grammar for most or for many students. So it is likely to take practice and going over again to memorize. But please try not to despair. And stick with it. So in the nominative, all the nominative singular forms for masculine, feminine, and neuter, and the accusative singular forms for feminine and neuter nouns, but not masculine nouns, that weak ending is simply the letter E. For everything else, apart from what I've just mentioned, the weak ending is en instead. So there's only two endings to choose from and retain here, which is much easier than the previous table. I think it is, it is necessary to believe that these are easier because I've seen so many students become quite overwhelmed with learning all of these tables and all of this material. When you look at them, it does look quite shocking, although trust me, it definitely does get a lot harder for certain languages. But if you look at the similarities and focus on the similarities across the different tables, that really helps. It no longer feels like new information that you have to massively revise and retain every single time. Once you've memorized one of these tables, actually, that goes a long way to helping with the others. The third pattern then that we're going to look at, and the third table, is when there is an indefinite article, the word for or an, and first, and then an adjective, and then the noun it's describing. And in that case, there is a different pattern, slightly different pattern, which is followed. Although this third pattern, I should say, or this third table, is essentially a mix of the first two. So instead of thinking of it as something separate, a third table that has to be completely fully learned, I would simply try and remember that it's actually very similar to the two previous tables. It's actually extremely similar to the second table, the one that we just saw here, with only a few differences. So what I would remember is the second table. I would try and remember the weak endings for adjectives, as in the second table, and then remember the few exceptions that are present here in this third table. You can see that the vast majority of endings here are, for the adjective, are in the letter E or the letter en, just as we saw in the second table, just as in the second table we came across. The only exceptions with different endings, which are not E or en, are the nominative singular masculine, the nominative singular neuter, and the accusative singular neuter. Those are the only exceptions, actually. Everything else, apart from the nominative singular masculine, the nominative singular neuter, and the accusative singular neuter, everything else is exactly the same as the second table that we saw with the weak endings. So if you know those weak endings by heart or well, that sets you up really well for this combination and this table too. And those exceptions, furthermore, that we talked about, the nominative singular masculine, nominative singular accusative, nominative singular masculine, nominative singular neuter, and accusative singular neuter, those three exceptions follow the same pattern as they did in the first table, actually. So here we've got the strong endings, ER for the nominative masculine singular, ES for the nominative neuter singular, and ES again for the accusative neuter singular. And they remain exactly the same in this third table as well. So this third table is just a mix of the two previous tables. The vast majority of it comes from the second table and remains exactly the same as the second table. And the only exceptions are those three that we've spoken about: nominative masculine singular, nominative neuter singular, and accusative neuter singular. And those exceptions go with exactly the same pattern as they had in the first table in any case. So in other words, there's nothing new to memorize here. And if you think of it that way, it can really help and help make it feel more manageable too. which is important. This table then, and all of these endings in this third table, they are used with any words ending in ein, followed by an adjective and then a noun. So most commonly, this occurs with the indefinite article, the word for or an, ein, eine, and so on in German. But it can also occur, for example, with possessive adjectives like mein, meaning my, or sein, meaning his or her or its or their, dein, meaning your, and so on. They will all take exactly the same pattern as this. Again, try not to be too intimidated by it, and try and remember this third table as a mix of the two tables before it. And therefore, there's actually technically nothing new. Every single one of these adjectives you've already come across before, these adjective endings you've already come across before in the two tables earlier, and in exactly the same places as before as well, in one of those two tables. Okay, now this is perhaps more advanced or perhaps slightly challenging, but there's a mini test of your understanding of these adjective endings with some example questions. So your task is to translate these from English to German. You're going to have to think of the vocab, of course, in German, but crucially, you'll also have to think of the case, gender, and number of the nouns, and then try and put them in the correct form. And if you can do this, yeah, that's very good. This is something that students often will struggle with. So the first sentence to translate to German is, I see the small dog. I see the small dog. So the small dog, that is, of course, the word the, and then an adjective, and then a noun. So try and think what form that should go in, what case you need, whether the word for dog is masculine, feminine, or neuter, whether it's singular or plural here, for example. You need to think through all that. Okay, and I'll reveal the answer for this first one. This would be, ich sehe den kleinen Hund. So the important thing is Hund is a masculine noun, the word for dog. Here it's going to go in the accusative because the dog is the object, the direct object. The dog is the one being seen in this sentence. And it's singular. We're talking about one dog rather than more than one. So the accusative masculine singular for the word the would be den. And then the adjective would also end in en, den kleinen Hund, as per the second table that we saw. So that en at the end of the adjective, kleinen, that's a weak ending, essentially. Okay, second example then. Here, the English is, we live in a modern city. Try and think of the German translation. Some words like modern are essentially, well, the same in its neuter, in its masculine singular nominative form in German. Again, you'll have to think of the case of a word like city, and also note that here we have the indefinite article for and then an adjective, and then noun. So try and think of which pattern that follows. And then put everything in the right form. Quite a bit to think through, but with practice, it does get easier. Okay, let me show the answer for this. So the first part, wir wohnen or wir leben in einer modernen Stadt. So this is in followed by the dative case. In is a possibly tricky preposition because it can take two cases. It can take the accusative case or the dative case. Here, there's no movement towards the city. We're not going to the city in any way. We simply live in the city. We started off living in the city and we end the sentence still living in the city. There's no movement towards the city. Therefore, this is going to be in followed by the dative case. So it all goes in the dative case. We have the word for ein, and Stadt is a feminine noun. Stadt for city is a feminine noun. So ein goes in its dative feminine singular form, which is einer, and the adjective then, modern, simply takes its weak ending, and the corresponding weak ending is en here. So it's going to be einer modernen Stadt. So that's as per the third table that we looked at, where we had the word for a, then an adjective, and then a noun. That's the pattern we're following here. Okay, hopefully not too much to take in. This third example is actually in the plural. So the English is old books are expensive. As mentioned, the gender is not important in the plural because everything in German follows the same pattern in the plural, regardless of gender, whether it's masculine, feminine, or neuter. So you can definitely use that to help you or to simplify things too. We have two adjectives in this sentence, so you're going to have to think about each of those. Okay, I'll show you the answer then. So this would become ältere Bücher sind teuer. So ältere Bücher, that is simply an adjective, alt meaning old, followed by a noun, book, books actually, Bücher. And therefore we would look at the first of those three tables that we saw, and the adjective takes the strong ending, which here in the nominative plural, this would all be in the nominative plural, would be just the adjective ending e. So alt becomes älter in the plural. With an umlaut as well, which I believe is just a slight exception. This is Buch, meaning book, is a neuter noun, but in the plural, the gender is not important or relevant anyways. Again, it's worth noting that there's a second adjective here in the sentence, which is the word expensive, the adjective expensive, which in German is teuer. That's the nominative masculine singular form or the dictionary form. And here, as we did mention, one of the exceptions or rules before, there's no agreement between that adjective and the noun it's describing, the Bücher or the books, because there's a verb in between, sandwiched in between the noun and the adjective. And when that occurs, there's never any agreement between the noun and the adjective that's describing it, which is much simpler. You don't have to think through the correct form of teuer, whether it should go nominative, neuter, plural, what form it needs to take. It just stays in its most common form, which is, as it is here, teuer, expensive. Okay, now there's a further small quiz to test your understanding of these German adjective endings. Question 1, what are the weak endings then for German adjectives? There are two potential ones, so try and name both. Okay, and I'm going to show the answer for this. The weak endings for German adjectives can be e or en. Of these, en is definitely the more frequent one. So you can start off perhaps by remembering everything as en, and then the ones where the weak ending is simply e instead. Question 2, true or false? If there's a verb coming between an adjective and the noun it describes, then the adjective will not change form to agree with the noun. Definitely something I talked about, so try and think back. Okay, and I'll show the answer. This is definitely true. If a verb separates the noun and the adjective will never change to agree with the noun it's describing. It simply remains in its masculine singular nominative form, without changing. Much easier. And number 3, which is true or false again, there is no distinction by gender, masculine, feminine, or neuter, for adjectives in the plural in German. Again, something I mentioned. Let me show you the answer then. This is also true, actually. German adjectives have the same plural pattern, regardless of whether the noun they're describing is masculine, feminine, or neuter. So you don't need to worry about the gender in the plural, which does make things at least a bit easier. And lastly, number 4, if a German adjective is next to the noun it's describing, in what 3 ways does it have to agree with the noun it describes? So what 3 things do you have to think of there? Okay, I'll reveal the answer for this now too. Those 3 things are the number, so whether the noun is singular, plural, the gender of the noun, if it's masculine, feminine, or neuter, and the case of the noun. So whether it's in the nominative case, accusative case, genitive case, or dative case. If the German adjective comes next to the noun it's describing, or they're not separated by a verb, you have to think through all of those three things. Okay, if you have questions about any of the information here, or if you'd like to know more about classes and more personalized help, which I do offer too, you can get in touch with me by email, through Facebook or Instagram. I post on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn mainly, almost every day. I talk a lot about my passion for languages, how to learn different languages, how to make the learning process fun and exciting, and how to use those languages as much as you can. But I do post a lot about exams like GCSEs too, how you can prepare for those as best as you can, among other things. So do give me a follow on each of those platforms. I have many free resources available, including for German GCSE students. So do reach out if you want to access any of those. And I do one-to-one classes, group classes, courses, and offer a lot more. So you can reach out if you'd like to know more about any of that.